Get your hands off him! You just my son!
If you grew up watching television in the late 70s, chances are you had a standing date with ABC every Tuesday night. You knew the families, you knew the faces, you thought you knew every little thing about what was happening on screen. But soap had more going on behind the scenes, and hiding in plain sight, than most people ever realized. Here are 20 small details you missed in soap.
These are your brains.
Detail 20. Soap was never meant to be the real title. Here is something that almost no one knows. The word soap was never intended to be the actual name of the show. Creator Susan Harris and the production team used it as a working title during development, purely as a placeholder while they searched for something better. It was the kind of name you scribble on a manila folder just to keep things organized, never imagining it would stick past the first week of meetings. Pre-production came and went. Writers wrote scripts. Sets were built. Casting happened. The crew got to work. And through all of it, nobody ever landed on a name they liked more. Everything else they considered felt either too on the nose or not quite right for what the show actually was. So when it finally went into production, soap was simply what they had. The placeholder became the title. A working nickname became a television institution. There is something oddly fitting about that. Given how the show itself operated, nothing was ever quite what it was originally supposed to be, starting with the name on the door.
Fortunately, life doesn't seem to be too crazy about her. As you can see, the camel...
Detail 19. Casey Kasem quit after the pilot. Most people who watched soap remember Rod Roddy as the voice of the series. That warm, knowing narrator who opened each episode, recapped the previous week's chaotic events in a tone that managed to be both sincere and slightly bewildered, and then closed things out with that trademark string of unanswered questions. His voice was inseparable from the experience of watching the show. But Roddy was not the first man in that announcer's booth. Casey Kasem, who was already a widely recognized voice from American Top 40, was originally cast as the show's announcer and recorded the pilot episode. He walked away after that single recording session. The show's content, its frank, unapologetic treatment of subjects that had rarely appeared in primetime comedy, was something Kasem decided he was not comfortable being associated with publicly. He did not return for the series proper. Rod Roddy stepped in and became part of the show's identity in a way that is difficult to imagine anyone else replicating. He remained with soap through all 4 seasons and all 85 episodes, his narration becoming as much a part of the weekly ritual as anything happening on screen. When viewers heard that voice, they were already home.
Take a second. I want it to be nice and neat for you, okay? Just 1 second.
Detail 18. The first episode drew a 39% audience share. Before the show had broadcast a single minute of actual television, it had been subjected to a months-long campaign of opposition. Religious organizations organized letter-writing drives. Advertisers reconsidered their involvement. ABC was forced to drop its commercial rate from $75,000 per spot, all the way down to $40,000, just to keep any sponsors on board at all. By the time the premiere date arrived, 18 of the network's 195 affiliates had refused to air the show outright, with others pushing it past 11 p.m. to limit its exposure. The network had received approximately 32,000 letters of protest before a single episode aired. None of that prepared anyone for what happened on the night of September 13, 1977, when soap premiered at 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. The show swept its time slot with a 25.6 rating and a 39% share of the national audience. ABC received hundreds of phone calls that night, and network executives described the overall reaction as mild, with more calls expressing support than opposition. In its first season, Soap ranked at number 13 in the Nielsen ratings. 6 months of protests had kept the show in newspapers and on television news constantly, functioning as a form of promotion no advertising budget could have purchased. By the time audiences finally got to see it for themselves, curiosity had already done the work.
I know that. That's why I'm here. It's just that, you see, I've had to mortgage the house.
Detail 17. Susan Harris had a 5-season plan, and it was never finished. Susan Harris did not write Soap episode by episode, making things up as she went. She came into the project with a complete map. Before production even began, she put together what the industry calls a show Bible. A comprehensive document laying out every significant character, every major storyline, and every turning point across 5 full seasons of television. ABC had agreed to that 5-season run, and Harris had thought it through end to end. The document was thorough enough that the network's censors used it as one of their primary targets when issuing their concerns about the show's content. They were not just reacting to individual scripts. They were reacting to a complete narrative architecture that Harris had already built in full. That architecture was never completed on screen. The ongoing pressure from sponsor defections and organized boycotts wore ABC down, and the network abruptly canceled the show at the end of season 4 without giving the production team sufficient warning to write a proper conclusion. Harris had more story to tell. The network had made a different decision. The final episode aired on April 20th, 1981, ending in the middle of its own story with every major character's fate left open. It stands as one of the most abruptly interrupted runs in American sitcom history.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but this press conference is over. Sheriff Campbell has business.
Detail 16. The Soap memo leaked to the press before the show aired. ABC's Internal Broadcast Standards and Practices Department, the network's censorship arm, reviewed Harris's show Bible and the pilot script carefully and produced a lengthy memo documenting their concerns. The document addressed not just the sexual material that had attracted the most press attention, but also the show's treatment of religion, its political content, and several storylines involving characters of specific ethnic backgrounds. That memo was leaked. On June 27, 1977, the Los Angeles Times published the document in its entirety, nearly 3 months before Soap reached television screens. Every objection the network had raised internally was now available for public reading. Any organization looking for specific things to be outraged about suddenly had a detailed, official inventory of possibilities. The controversy expanded well beyond what any single review had started, and it was being fed in part by the network's own internal paperwork. Harris and the production team were navigating a fire that their own network had inadvertently helped to fuel.
Wear that belted. I thought of wearing it belted. It looks much better that way.
Detail 15. The Newsweek review was based on a show the writer had never seen. In June 1977, Newsweek published a fall television preview that included a critique of Soap. The writer, Harry F. Waters, described the show in alarming terms and characterized several of its storylines in ways that ranged from significantly exaggerated to simply false. Most notably, he claimed the show contained a scene of a Catholic priest being seduced in a confessional. That scene did not exist anywhere in the series. The detail that made all of this particularly significant: Waters had not actually watched the pilot before writing his piece. His account was constructed from secondhand information, and some of it was invention. The errors were consequential enough that ABC President Fred Silverman was moved to publicly describe the speculation as erroneous, exaggerated, and in a few cases, ridiculous. But the damage had already been done before Silverman said a word. Religious and civic groups had mobilized their opposition based on a description of a show that, in several key respects, did not match the show that actually existed. The protests were real. The organizing was real. The boycotts were real. And much of it was built on a foundation of things that were never in the program.
What are you doing here, Mrs. Fine?
Voting.
Detail 14. The pilot had to be reshot with a new Mary Campbell. The version of Soap that audiences eventually saw was not exactly the version first assembled. When the pilot was initially produced, Robert Guillaume was already in place as Benson Dubois, and the essential dynamics of the show were set. But the actress originally cast to play Mary Campbell, the working-class sister and co-anchor of the entire series, did not make the transition to the broadcast version. Director Jay Sandrich later explained the problem. The actress was talented, but she brought the same anxious, high-strung energy that Richard Mulligan was already channeling into the role of Bert Campbell. Two characters wound that tightly in the same household was not a chemistry that was going to work. Mary needed to be a counterweight to Bert's volatility, not a mirror of it. Fred Silverman authorized reshooting the pilot with a different actress in the role. Catherine Damon came in, and the difference was immediate. Her Mary was steadier, more grounded, warmer, the kind of person who could absorb chaos without becoming chaos herself. The dynamic between Damon and Mulligan became one of the emotional cores of the show, and 4 years later, both of them would win Emmy Awards for the performances that began with that reshoot. Detail 13. The sound crew kept pointing the microphone at the dummy. Chuck Campbell, played by Jay Johnson, was one of Soap's stranger inventions. A young, psychologically troubled ventriloquist whose dummy, Bob, appeared to operate with an entirely separate personality and set of opinions. Johnson's performance was extraordinarily committed. He created two distinct vocal characters, two distinct physical presences, and sold the illusion with a consistency that went well beyond technical skill. It was so convincing, in fact, that it caused a practical problem during early production. The show's sound crew kept instinctively pointing the microphone at Bob when the dummy had a line. They were responding to what their eyes were telling them rather than what they knew to be true. The audio department had to consciously retrain itself to track Johnson, the actual source of every sound, rather than the puppet that appeared to be speaking. It is the kind of compliment that can only be paid in the form of a logistical headache, and Johnson earned it fully.
You know, this is terrific. How do you make it work?
Take it easy.
Detail 12. Chuck and Bob were only supposed to last one story arc. The original plan for Chuck and Bob was a single contained arc, not a multi-season run. The story as conceived had Chuck responsible for the murder at the center of Season 1's central mystery. The arc was designed to resolve in a particularly memorable way. Bob the dummy testifying in court against Chuck. After that, the characters would have been written out, a striking guest appearance and nothing more. Audience reaction forced a revision. Viewers connected with Chuck and Bob more intensely than anyone had expected, and the producers made the decision to alter the story, changing the identity of the actual murderer so that Chuck and Bob could remain part of the show. They stayed for 61 episodes across all 4 seasons, and Bob became one of the most distinctive presences in the cast, a wooden puppet that somehow managed to feel more real than several of the human characters surrounding him.
Any easier, you know.
Benson, please, sit down. Come on, sit down right here. I've got a surprise for you.
Detail 11. Robert Guillaume won his Emmy before he left for Benson. Benson Dubois was, by many measures, the stealth center of soap. Robert Guillaume played the role with a combination of barely contained disdain for Chester Tate's pomposity and genuine, unguarded warmth toward Jessica, a dynamic that gave the character more dimension than almost anyone else in the ensemble. The writing gave him the sharpest lines, and Guillaume delivered them with the kind of precision that makes a one-liner sound like a considered observation rather than a punchline. At the 1979 Emmy Awards, he won Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series for the role. He left soap at the start of season 3 to headline the spin-off Benson, which premiered in September 1979 and ran for 7 full seasons. On Benson, Guillaume won a second Emmy in 1985, this time for Outstanding Lead Actor, making him the only performer at that time to win Emmys in both supporting and lead categories for playing the same character across 2 different series. His departure from soap was honored within the show itself. The season 3 retrospective episode was built around Jessica saying goodbye to Benson, using clips from their time together to make the farewell feel earned.
Danny, for me? You shouldn't have.
Detail 10. Jody Dallas was not the first gay character on American network television. The controversy that surrounded Billy Crystal's Jody Dallas was enormous and sustained. Religious groups listed him as one of their primary objections to the show. Gay advocacy organizations voiced their own concerns, worried that the initial presentation of the character relied too heavily on stereotypes. Jody seemed to attract criticism from opposite directions simultaneously, which was perhaps its own kind of distinction. What often got lost in all of that noise was a factual point. Jody was not the first recurring gay character in American primetime television. That distinction belongs to a short-lived ABC program called The Corner Bar, which aired in 1972, 5 years before soap premiered. What Jody was, however, was one of the most sustained and evolving portrayals of a gay character in the history of the medium up to that point. Over 4 seasons, the character moved well beyond his initial introduction. He became a father and fought for custody of his daughter, a storyline that generated one of the show's most genuinely moving arcs. An ABC viewer poll during that custody storyline showed overwhelming audience support for Jody keeping his child, a result that spoke to how far the character had traveled from his controversial debut and how much viewers had come to care about him.
Are you kidding? Not really. This is salad. I didn't have to cook it. It's raw.
Well, it looks wonderful.
You know the secret to good salad.
Detail 9. Susan Harris appeared in the show she created as a prostitute. Susan Harris wrote most of soap's episodes herself. She was the creator, the primary writer, and one of the executive producers, the single voice most responsible for what the show was, season after season. Her connection to the material was about as complete as it gets in television. She also appeared in 2 episodes of the series she made. Harris played a character named Babette, a streetwalker who, according to the show's framing, was personally acquainted with a significant portion of the adult male population of the fictional Dunn's River, Connecticut. It was a small part, played entirely within the show's satirical register, and most viewers at the time had no idea that the woman in the scene was the same person who had written every word of every script around her. It was the kind of private joke that only the people who made the show fully understood, fitting for a series that was full of things operating on more than one level at once.
Well, I'm a little nervous. I mean, after all, it isn't every day that a girl gets sentenced.
Detail 8. Several cast members had genuine soap opera backgrounds. The premise of Soap was built on the architecture of daytime drama, its serialized storytelling, its melodramatic plotting, its tangled family histories, and impossible coincidences. What gave the parody its particular texture was that it was being performed, in part, by people who had spent real time inside the genre they were now satirizing. Robert Mandan, who played the relentlessly unfaithful Chester Tate, had previously been a leading man on Search for Tomorrow. Donnelly Rhodes, who joined the cast as Dutch Leitner in Season 2, had played the first husband of Katherine Chancellor on The Young and the Restless. Arthur Peterson Jr., the senile war veteran known only as the Major, had been heard in the radio version of Guiding Light decades before the show existed. Marla Pennington, who appeared as Leslie Walker, had spent 3 years on General Hospital as Samantha Livingston Chandler. These actors brought something to their performances that could not be faked, an understanding of the rhythms and conventions of the form they were now exaggerating for comic effect. The parody was sharpest when the people performing it had once taken the original seriously.
Malone, drop dead, Tate.
Boys now, boys. Why don't you take turns? Each one.
Detail 7. Katherine Hellmond was nominated for an Emmy every season and never won. Katherine Hellmond's Jessica Tate was one of the most carefully constructed comic performances of the 1970s. She played a woman of considerable wealth and almost supernatural obliviousness with a kind of serene, unruffled sweetness that made the character both ridiculous and genuinely lovable. Jessica existed in a household that was constantly in various stages of crisis, and Hellmond played her as someone who somehow floated just slightly above all of it. Not because she was unaffected, but because she was constitutionally incapable of fully perceiving just how much was going wrong around her at any given moment. Every year the show ran, the Television Academy recognized what Hellmond was doing. She received Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series in 1978, 1979, 1980, and 1981, all 4 seasons of the show's run. She did not win any of them. In 1980, the year her co-star Catherine Damon took the award, Hellmond had again been passed over for a performance that many people watching at home felt deserved the recognition. She did eventually receive formal acknowledgement from the Hollywood Foreign Press. At the 1981 Golden Globe Awards, she won Best Performance by an Actress in a TV Series, Musical, or Comedy. It was a deserved recognition for a body of work that the Emmys had persistently admired without rewarding. For many who watched the show during its run, that omission remained one of the harder decisions to understand.
But it isn't easy. I mean, as much as I'm mad at you, Eunice, I still love you.
Detail 6. Mulligan and Damon won their Emmys during a SAG strike and could not attend. The 1980 Emmy Awards brought Soap its most significant evening of recognition. Richard Mulligan and Catherine Damon both took home awards for their performances as Bert and Mary Campbell, Outstanding Lead Actor and Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series, respectively. It was a genuine acknowledgement of what the two of them had built together over 3 seasons, a comedic partnership that had also found consistent room for real emotional weight. Neither of them was present to accept the award. The Emmy telecast that year fell during an active Screen Actors Guild strike, called under then SAG president William Schallert. Both Mulligan and Damon were Guild members who honored the strike and stayed away from the ceremony. Their trophies were collected on their behalf. It was one of those moments that sits uncomfortably in television history, an industry celebrating its best work, while a portion of its own workforce was in active dispute with it, and 2 of the evening's honorees choosing solidarity over the moment of personal recognition they had earned.
Jessica Tate?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you see, you're a few minutes early. We weren't expecting you until 9.
Detail 5. Beer Arthur appeared in a Season 4 retrospective as an angel. Each returning season of soap opened with a 90-minute retrospective that used clips from previous seasons to bring audiences up to speed. These episodes needed a framing device to give the clips some connective tissue, and the show found increasingly inventive ways to provide one. The Season 3 retrospective showed Jessica saying goodbye to Benson before he departed for his own series. The Season 4 version, titled Jessica's Wonderful Life, went further. Jessica had just died in a hospital at the end of Season 3. The retrospective found her in heaven, where she encountered an angel who helped her revisit the events of her life before deciding whether she was ready to leave it behind. That angel was played by B. Arthur. At the time, Arthur was best known for Maude, the Norman Lear series that had ended in 1978. She was not yet the B. Arthur of the Golden Girls. That would come in 1985 in another Susan Harris production. The two of them had crossed paths in television before, and the retrospective appearance felt like a meeting between two parts of the same sensibility. Sharp, warm, entirely unafraid of difficult material, and capable of finding the human moment inside the comedy.
Really? Everybody down! What is it?
Detail 4. Jessica's fate was left unresolved due to an abrupt cancellation. The final image of soap in its original broadcast run is one of the most unresolved endings in the history of American television. Jessica Tate stands before a firing squad in South America. Shots are fired. The screen cuts away. The series was over. This was not a crafted cliffhanger designed to keep audiences hungry through the summer. It was the consequence of a cancellation that arrived without adequate notice. ABC pulled the plug on the show at the end of Season 4, while Susan Harris still had storylines in active development and characters in the middle of their arcs. There was no time to write a proper conclusion. The firing squad was simply where Jessica happened to be when the show stopped. Harris had planned a 5th season. The network had made a different decision. In 1983, the dangling thread of Jessica's fate was partially addressed through a guest appearance on Benson. Jessica appeared to her old butler as a kind of vision, informing him that she had survived. She was in a coma in South America, not dead. As the scene ended, the soap theme played underneath it, a small and deliberate acknowledgement of everything the two shows had shared and everything that had been left unfinished. It was a moment of closure that, characteristically for soap, resolved very little.
The Tates have more secrets than they do.
Detail 3. The show's opening disclaimer was also read aloud. When soap premiered on September 13, 1977, it was preceded by a content warning that had almost no equivalent in American primetime television. The disclaimer stated that the show was part of a continuing character comedy featuring adult themes and advised viewer discretion. That kind of language is utterly routine now. It runs before programs constantly, and most people barely register it. In 1977, it was unusual enough to be notable. More unusual still was ABC's decision to have Rod Roddy read the disclaimer aloud in addition to displaying it on screen. The warning was not just something to read, it was something to hear, delivered in the same voice that would shortly be introducing the week's episode. The disclaimer ran throughout the entire first season before the network quietly dropped it. It was one of the first times an American network television program had included such a warning at all, and it would take years before the practice became as commonplace as it is today.
A little peck on the cheek, you won't feel a thing. Be like a fly landing.
Detail 2. Time magazine eventually named it one of the 100 best TV shows ever made. During its original run, soap attracted some of the harshest criticism that American television had to offer. The Los Angeles Times described it as a prolonged dirty joke. Variety called it forced and derivative. The National PTA declared it one of the 10 worst shows on television. The pile-on was both organized and sustained, and it came from critics and advocacy groups who often seemed to be reacting to the idea of the show rather than its actual content. The decades have produced a very different verdict. In 2007, Time magazine included Soap in its list of the 100 best TV shows of all time. In 2010, TV Guide ranked the Tates and the Campbells at number 17 in its list of television's greatest families. The show that had been denounced from pulpits and abandoned by nervous sponsors had, in the fullness of time, taken its place in the record of what American television accomplished in the late 1970s. The 4 Emmy Awards it collected during its original run, including the award for Outstanding Art Direction in a Comedy Series in its very first year on the air, had always indicated that the quality was there. The retrospective recognition simply made it official.
Miley, grow up. Bye, Dad. Bye, Mom. Bye, Bubbles.
Billy, breakfast.
I can't, Mom. I'm late for school.
Detail 1. The show's theme music was composed by George Allison Tipton. There is something about the Soap theme that lodges permanently in the memory. It carries a kind of ironic warmth, slightly grand in its orchestration, slightly wistful in its melody, with just enough of a knowing quality to signal that what you are about to watch is not going to take itself entirely seriously, even when it is being entirely serious. That combination of tones was not accidental. It was exactly what the show needed, and it set everything in motion before a single character appeared on screen each week. The composer behind it was George Allison Tipton, whose work gave the theme precisely the right balance between sincerity and self-awareness. The music played underneath Rod Roddy's opening narration every week, the two elements working together to prepare audiences for the experience Soap was about to provide. One that could move from absurdist comedy to genuine human feeling and back again within a single scene, and somehow make both feel true. For anyone who watched the show during its original run on ABC, those opening bars remain among the most immediately transporting sounds that 1970s American television produced. A few notes, and suddenly the room feels different. It is 1978 again. It is a Tuesday evening. The Tates and the Campbells are about to walk through their front doors, and something improbable and oddly moving is about to happen. That's our list of 20 small details you missed in Soap. If you watched it the first time around, hopefully some of these brought back a memory or two, or shed new light on something you saw without fully knowing what was behind it. And if you are coming to the show for the first time, now you know a little more about what was happening on the other side of the screen. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. There is a lot more television history where this came from, and we would love to have you back for the next one.